You're just a maid. They mocked the black nanny. Mafia boss canceled the wedding minutes later. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's dive into today's story. It was a night unlike any other at the Valentino family mansion. A lavish celebration was underway, a wedding that everyone thought would be a fairy tale. But for Marie, the black nanny, it was just another night of feeling invisible in the grand scheme of things. The mansion was bathed in golden light, the crystal chandeliers sparkling above as the wealthy guests chatted and clinked glasses. Marie, in her simple black dress, moved quietly through the crowd, carefully carrying trays of hors d'oeuvres. She had been working here for months, taking care of little Marco, the mafia boss's son, but always staying out of sight, tucked away from the glittering world that everyone else seemed to be a part of. She had learned early that silence was her safest bet. The mansion was a kingdom in its own right, and she was nothing more than a servant in the eyes of those who lived within it. As she walked through the opulent hall, she overheard snickers and whispers from a group of guests seated at a nearby table. Just a maid, one of them muttered under their breath, their laughter a cruel echo in the otherwise serene atmosphere. Marie's heart sank, but she kept her head down, pretending not to hear. She had learned to shut out the hurt, to endure the mocking and degrading remarks. But tonight, something felt different. The whispers and glances from the guests felt sharper, more deliberate. The words, just a maid, echoed in her mind, a reminder of her place in a world that refused to acknowledge her humanity. As Marie continued to serve the guests, her eyes caught a brief, fleeting glance from Victor Valentino, the mafia boss. He was seated at the head of the room, surrounded by his powerful guests, but his gaze lingered on her. For a moment longer than usual. She quickly looked away, fearing that he might notice the tears welling in her eyes. Despite the arrogance and coldness he carried, she had always admired him in silence. He was the one person who had never belittled her, who had never shown her the disdain that others did. But that brief moment of eye contact wasn't enough to ease the ache in her heart. As the night went on, Marie couldn't help but feel the weight of her invisibility, her worth reduced to nothing more than that of a servant. The guests continued their laughter and conversations, oblivious to the pain they caused. Then, in an instant, everything changed. The room fell silent. A voice, cold and commanding, cut through the chatter. Victor Valentino stood up, his dark eyes scanning the room. His voice, deep and controlled, echoed through the mansion. Enough. The crowd fell still as he took a step forward, his presence commanding attention. The guests, once so confident in their superiority, now found themselves at a loss for words. Victor's gaze shifted to Marie, who had frozen in place. For the first time that night, his eyes softened, a look of something unspoken passing between them. Without a word, he turned to the guests who had been mocking her. "You will leave now," he said, his tone leaving no room for argument. The room remained silent as the guests scrambled to gather their things, their faces pale with shock. But Victor wasn't done yet. He turned to the woman who had humiliated Marie the most, his eyes narrowing with a cold fury that sent shivers down her spine. "As for you," he said, his voice like ice, "this wedding is over." The woman gasped, her face paling as she realized what was happening. The guests were stunned into silence as Victor canceled the wedding, his decision final. Marie stood there, frozen, unable to process what had just happened. The man who had always seemed distant, even intimidating, had just stood up for her, the maid. His actions, swift and decisive, had shattered the false sense of superiority that the guests had held over her. She could hardly believe what she had witnessed. As the guests were escorted out, Victor turned to Marie. His eyes were softer now, no longer cold and indifferent. "Are you all right?" he asked, his voice gentle. The words an unexpected kindness that caused her heart to race. She nodded, still in shock, unable to speak. What had just happened? She had never imagined that the powerful mafia boss would come to her defense in such a public way. It was as though, for the first time, someone saw her, not just as a servant, but as a person. As the room cleared, The weight of the moment settled on Marie's shoulders. For the first time, she felt seen. And for the first time, she felt like maybe, just maybe, her life could be more than what it had always been. The mansion had fallen into an uneasy quiet after the wedding was abruptly canceled. The guests, once bustling with laughter and conversation, had now dispersed, leaving behind only the echo of their footsteps and the faint sound of the grand doors closing. Marie stood in the center of the opulent room, her heart still racing from the unexpected turn of events. She couldn't shake the image of Victor Valentino, the Mafia boss, stepping in to defend her. The man who had always seemed untouchable, cold and powerful, had just torn apart the life that had once seemed so certain, all because of a moment of kindness toward her. As the last of the guests left the mansion, Marie found herself standing in the hallway, the weight of what had just happened beginning to sink in. She had been humiliated, mocked by people who had no respect for her, no regard for her worth as a person. But now, here she was, still in the same position, only now, it felt different. Something had shifted. Victor's words had cut through the air like a blade, commanding attention and respect. The guests who had once looked down on her, who had laughed at her, were now left to scurry away in disgrace. She could still hear his voice in her head. "You will leave now." The power behind those words, the finality of them, was something she had never experienced before. For the first time, she had been seen, truly seen, by someone who mattered. But now that the guests were gone, what was left for her? What would happen next? As she stood there, lost in her thoughts, she heard footsteps approaching. It was Victor. He walked toward her with a steady, purposeful stride, his dark eyes never leaving her. The atmosphere between them had changed. He had always been the boss, the one everyone feared, but now there was something else in his gaze. Something softer. Something almost human. "Are you okay?" he asked, his voice quieter than before. Marie's breath caught in her throat. She didn't know how to respond. The events of the evening had left her shaken, but his presence, his concern, made her feel something she hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. She nodded, her voice barely a whisper. "I'm fine." Victor studied her for a moment longer, his eyes searching her face as though trying to read her mind. There was a pause, the kind of silence that felt heavy with unspoken words. Finally, he spoke again. "I don't want you to feel like you have to stay here, Marie. You've been through enough." Marie's heart skipped a beat. Was he asking her to leave? The thought sent a wave of panic through her chest. She didn't want to leave. She didn't want to return to the life she had before, where she was invisible and forgotten. But at the same time, she didn't want to stay if it meant being a burden on him. "I don't know what to do," she admitted, the words tumbling out before she could stop them. "I've never been treated like this before. Not by anyone." Victor's expression softened, and for a brief moment, he seemed almost vulnerable. "You're not a burden, Marie," he said, his voice low and reassuring. "You never were." He paused, as if considering something. "I don't know what it is about you, but you've shown me something tonight. Something I didn't think I could still feel." His words hung in the air, a confession she wasn't sure she fully understood. She looked up at him, trying to make sense of it all. Was he saying what she thought he was saying? Before she could respond, he continued, his tone more certain this time. "I'm not going to let anyone treat you like that again. Not while you're here." Marie felt a lump form in her throat. She had been ready to leave, to retreat back into the shadows where she felt safe. But now, something inside her was changing. She didn't have to hide anymore. She didn't have to endure the cruelty of others without someone standing by her. Victor had shown her a glimpse of something better, and for the first time in a long time, she felt like she deserved it. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice trembling with emotion. Victor nodded, his expression unreadable. He wasn't one for sentimentality, but there was something about her, something that made him want to protect her. He had seen many people come and go, but Marie was different. He couldn't explain it, but he felt something for her that he hadn't felt in a long time. He could sense the struggle within her, the fear of being abandoned, of being cast aside. And that was something he couldn't allow. "You don't have to thank me," he said, his voice steady. "Just don't forget that you're not alone anymore." With that, he turned and walked away, leaving Marie standing there, still trying to process everything that had just happened. But as she stood in the quiet hallway, the weight of her new reality began to settle on her shoulders. She wasn't just a maid anymore. She was someone who mattered. And that thought, that simple truth, was enough to make her believe in herself again. Marie sat alone in the small, quiet room that had become her sanctuary within the mansion. The sound of the wind rustling the leaves outside was the only noise breaking the silence. The events of the past few hours swirled in her mind, but the overwhelming feeling she had was one she hadn't experienced in a long time: peace. She had been treated like a person, not just a servant. Victor's words echoed in her ears, his promise that she was no longer invisible. For so long, she had hidden behind the walls of the mansion, doing her job with little more than a nod of acknowledgement from those around her. But now, after everything had unfolded, she felt different. She felt seen. But despite the relief, a part of her still held on to the fear that it was all temporary, that it was just a fleeting moment of kindness in a world that would quickly return to its cruel indifference. As she sat there, staring out the window, she felt the weight of the life she had built slipping away. What was her place now? How would she navigate this new reality? She wasn't sure, but one thing was clear: she couldn't go back to the way things were. Her thoughts were interrupted by the soft knock on her door. It was Victor, and his presence alone made her heart race. He stood in the doorway, his tall frame casting a shadow that seemed to stretch across the room. His eyes, once cold and distant, were now soft, filled with something she couldn't quite place. "Can I come in?" he asked, his voice gentle. She nodded, unsure of what to say. As he entered, the door clicked shut behind him, and for a moment, they both stood in silence. "I wanted to check on you," Victor said, his tone uncharacteristically warm. "You've been through a lot tonight." Marie's breath caught in her throat. She wasn't used to this side of him. The Mafia boss, the man who controlled empires, was now standing before her with concern in his eyes. It felt surreal. "I'm okay," she said, trying to steady her voice. "Really?" He didn't seem convinced, stepping closer to her. "You're not okay?" he said softly. "Not yet, but you will be. I won't let anyone hurt you again." Marie blinked, unsure if she had heard him correctly. She had never expected someone like Victor to speak to her like this, to offer her not just protection, but care. It was a foreign concept, something she had never dared to imagine. "Why are you doing this?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Why are you helping me?" Victor paused, his gaze shifting to the floor before returning to meet hers. "I don't know," he admitted. "Something about you. Something about tonight made me realize I can't stand by and let people like you be treated the way they have been. You deserve more than this life. And for whatever reason, I want to be the one to make sure you get it." Marie felt a lump form in her throat. She had spent so long believing she wasn't worthy of kindness, of anything good. But here he was, telling her she was worth more. The idea felt almost impossible to believe. "I don't know what to say," she murmured. "You don't have to say anything," he replied. "You don't need to earn my help. You just need to accept it." Marie was silent for a long moment, her mind racing with thoughts she couldn't quite put into words. Everything had changed, but she didn't know how to navigate this new world. The life she had once accepted as her fate was now slipping through her fingers. And for the first time, she wasn't sure if that was a bad thing. Victor watched her closely, sensing her inner turmoil. "You don't have to have all the answers right now," he said, his voice soothing. "Take your time. But know that you're not alone anymore." His words lingered in the air, heavy with meaning. Marie looked at him, feeling a warmth spread through her chest, a feeling she hadn't allowed herself to experience in years. "Hope. Thank you," she said, her voice barely audible. "Thank you for seeing me." Victor nodded, his expression softening. "You're welcome." He turned to leave, but paused at the door, looking back at her one last time. "We'll figure this out together," he said. "You're not alone in this anymore." And with that, he was gone, leaving Marie standing in the quiet room, her heart pounding in her chest. The silence returned, but it was different this time. It wasn't oppressive. It wasn't filled with fear. It was a new kind of silence, one filled with possibility. Marie wasn't sure what the future held, but for the first time in a long time, she felt like it was hers to shape. And that thought, that tiny flicker of hope, was enough to make her believe that maybe, just maybe, she could have a different life. One where she wasn't just a maid, but someone who mattered. Marie sat in the small sitting room, her hands folded tightly in her lap as she stared at the dimly lit fireplace. The crackling sound of the fire filled the otherwise silent room, but it did little to calm the whirlwind of thoughts racing through her mind. Her life had shifted in a way she never expected, and now, with everything that had happened, she was left trying to make sense of it all. The events from the night before replayed in her head like a loop. Victor had stepped in, not only to stop the wedding but to defend her, an invisible maid who had only ever known the harsh sting of mockery and disdain. She had never imagined that she would be seen like this, especially not by someone like him. For a moment, she thought maybe it was just a dream. But the warmth of the room, the smell of the dinner that had been left untouched in the dining hall, and the quiet steps of the staff moving about told her it was real. She was in this world now, the world of power and influence, a world that had always seemed so far out of reach. But where did that leave her? How would she fit into this new reality? The silence was broken by a soft knock on the door. Marie stood quickly, her breath catching in her throat as she crossed the room. It was Victor. She had grown used to seeing him from afar, distant, commanding, his gaze always piercing, never warm. But now, there was something different about him. Something softer. Marie? His voice was low, almost hesitant. Can we talk? Marie hesitated before opening the door, unsure of what this conversation would bring. But she knew she couldn't hide forever. She stepped aside, allowing him to enter. Victor stood in the center of the room, his presence as commanding as ever, but his posture was different. He was no longer the Mafia boss who commanded with fear and authority. Now, he was just a man who had shown her kindness when no one else had. You look like you have a lot on your mind, he said, his voice steady, but with an undercurrent of concern. Marie nodded, feeling the weight of his words. I do, she admitted. I don't know what to think about all of this. I never imagined I'd be in this position. Victor studied her for a moment, then took a step closer. I can't pretend to understand what you're going through, but I can tell you this. Things are going to change. I won't let anyone treat you like they did before. His words, so simple yet powerful, sent a shiver through her. She had spent so many years convinced that she was nothing, just a tool for others to use. But now, with Victor's words, it was like the world was shifting beneath her feet. I don't know what to do with that, she confessed, her voice barely above a whisper. How do I fit into your world? This world I've never belonged in. Victor's expression softened. You belong because you're not like them, he said. You've never asked for anything, never demanded anything. You've worked for what you have, and that's more than anyone here can say. Marie's heart clenched. She wanted to believe him, to trust him, but the fear that had been ingrained in her for so long was hard to shake. I don't know if I'm ready for all of this, she said. Everything's happening so fast. Victor took a deep breath, his gaze steady. I know it's a lot, and I'm not asking you to have all the answers right now, but I am asking you to trust me. Trust that I'll make sure no one hurts you again, that I'll make sure you have a place here if you want it. His words were like a promise, and for the first time in a long time, Marie felt like she could believe in something. But still, there was doubt. And what if I don't want to stay? What if I want to leave all of this behind and go back to my old life? Victor paused, his eyes never leaving hers. Then you can go, he said. But know this, you won't be running from something. You'll be running from the chance to be something more. You'll be running from the opportunity to live a life you've never even dreamed of. The weight of his words settled in her chest. For so long, Marie had thought her life was already decided for her. But now, she was faced with a choice to walk away or to step into something new, something uncertain but full of possibility. The decision felt like it could change everything. I'm scared, Marie said softly, the fear she had been carrying bubbling to the surface. I don't know if I'm strong enough for this. Victor reached out, his hand gently resting on her shoulder. You're stronger than you think, he said. And you don't have to do this alone. I'm here, Marie. I'll always be here. Marie closed her eyes for a moment, letting his words wash over her. She had spent so many years feeling invisible, unworthy of anything good. But now, with Victor standing beside her, she felt something shift inside her. Maybe she wasn't as powerless as she thought. Maybe she had a future in this world after all. When she opened her eyes, she looked at Victor and nodded. I'll stay, she said, her voice steady. I'll stay, and I'll figure this out. Victor's face softened with something that almost looked like relief. Good, he said. We'll figure it out together. Marie had spent the entire week walking through the mansion in a daze. The days felt like they were moving too fast, and yet, at the same time, like they were dragging on endlessly. The The world around her, once so familiar in its coldness, was now shifting in ways she couldn't understand. Her new reality was a far cry from the life she had known just a week ago. Each day, she woke up to the lavish surroundings, to the staff treating her with a new respect that she had never imagined. The walls that had once seemed so suffocating now felt more like an odd kind of protection. But with every passing moment, the uncertainty of her situation grew. Victor had given her a choice, a path she never thought she'd have the courage to walk. She could stay and be part of something bigger, something beyond the life she had always known. Or she could leave, return to a world she had tried to escape. But what would that even mean for her now? Could she go back to her old life? Could she ever go back to being invisible? As the days passed, Marie found herself walking through the mansion with a strange sense of purpose. She wasn't just moving through the halls. She was becoming a part of them. Slowly, she began to settle into her role, though doubts still crept into her mind. Her thoughts were interrupted by a familiar voice. Marie. She turned to see Victor standing in the doorway of the study, his eyes scanning the room with his usual cold precision. But there was something different in his gaze today. It wasn't the ruthless Mafia boss that she had first encountered. This was the man who had stepped in to defend her, who had made promises he didn't have to keep. "Can I speak with you for a moment?" he asked, his voice low and steady. Marie nodded, feeling a slight knot form in her stomach. She had learned to never quite know what to expect when it came to Victor, but something told her that today's conversation would be different. She followed him into the study, her steps hesitant. The large room, lined with shelves of books and leather chairs, felt more intimate now. It had once seemed cold, imposing, but now, with Victor standing there, it felt like the stage for something much more personal. "I've been thinking," Victor began, his voice more vulnerable than usual. "I need you to understand that the life I lead, the world I control, it's not one for the faint of heart. It's dangerous, and there are risks you're going to face just by being here." Marie looked at him, her heart pounding in her chest. She knew that being around him, in his world, would never be simple. But something inside her, something she couldn't quite define, told her that this was where she needed to be. "I'm not afraid," she said, her voice steady, though her insides trembled. "I've faced worse in my life. Being invisible, being treated like I don't matter. That's been the real fear." Victor regarded her quietly for a moment, as if weighing her words. "That's why I want you to understand something," he continued. "I don't want you to think that just because you're here, just because I've shown you kindness, that this is easy. It's not. But it's your choice. You can walk away at any time, but once you're in, there's no going back." The weight of his words hung in the air between them, but instead of feeling suffocated by them, Marie felt a strange sense of clarity. She had spent her entire life hiding, but this moment, felt like the first time she was truly seen. She wasn't sure where this path would lead her, but she knew it was one she had to take. "I understand," she said softly. "And I'm not leaving. Not now." Victor's eyes softened slightly, and he nodded. "Good. I've arranged for you to start learning more about the things that happen in this world. You'll need to understand it all, Marie. The power, the risks, the responsibilities. But first, there's one thing I need from you." Marie raised an eyebrow, unsure of what he meant. "What is it?" "I need you to trust me," he said, his tone serious. "I need you to trust that everything I'm doing is to protect you, to give you a life you never thought possible. But trust isn't easy. It's earned." Marie felt a pang in her chest, something she couldn't quite place. She had spent her life learning not to trust anyone, especially powerful men like Victor. But something about him was different. He hadn't asked for anything in return for his protection, no favors, no promises, just her trust. It was more than she had ever expected, more than she had ever been given. "I trust you," she said, the words coming out more easily than she had anticipated. Victor looked at her for a long moment, as if searching for any sign of doubt, but when he didn't find any, he nodded again. "That's all I needed to hear." He turned and walked toward the door, but paused just before leaving. "I'll see you later, Marie. We'll start your training tomorrow." Marie watched him leave, her heart racing. She had made a choice. She had decided to stay, to trust him, to step into a world she knew nothing about. The road ahead was uncertain, but for the first time in her life, she felt like she wasn't walking it alone. The next few days passed in a blur of activity, but Marie's mind remained focused on one thing: her new life. Victor had kept his word. He didn't treat her like an outsider, and she wasn't just a maid anymore. He had given her a place at his side, a role that felt more significant than anything she had ever imagined. But with this new life came new responsibilities, ones that were far more complicated than the ones she had left behind. Each day, Victor trained her on the inner workings of the world he controlled. His world was vast, filled with people, power, and endless risks. He showed her how to read contracts, how to navigate the delicate balance between loyalty and power, how to understand the importance of trust in a world where betrayal could come from anyone. At first, Marie struggled. The concepts were foreign, the stakes high, and the weight of each decision felt unbearable at times. But Victor was patient. He never pushed her too hard, but he always made it clear that if she wanted to survive in this world, she needed to be sharp. She had to understand everything. It wasn't just about learning power. It was about understanding the price of power and what it could cost if you weren't careful. One afternoon, after a particularly exhausting lesson on the political landscape of Victor's business dealings, he led her to the rooftop of the mansion. The sky was a deep orange as the sun set, casting a warm glow over the sprawling estate below. "Come here," he said, guiding her to the edge of the roof. Marie stood beside him, feeling the cool breeze against her skin as she looked out over the city. It was hard to believe that just a few days ago, she had been nothing more than a servant, hidden in the shadows of this world. "This is what you need to understand," Victor said, his voice steady. "It's not just about having power. It's about knowing when to use it, when to hold back, and when to make the hard decisions." Marie turned to look at him. His face, usually cold and calculating, was now softened by the fading light. "You've been with me for a while now. You've seen the way people look at me. But you haven't seen the other side, the side that I don't show anyone." He paused, as if weighing his words carefully. "Being in my position means constantly being on guard. It means knowing that there are people out there who would do anything to take what I've built. And it means trusting only a few." Marie nodded, absorbing his words. She had seen the ruthlessness of his world, but she hadn't fully understood the weight of it. "It's a dangerous world," Victor continued, his eyes hardening as he looked out over the city. "But I can promise you this. As long as you're by my side, I will protect you." The words hung in the air, heavy with meaning. Marie felt a shiver run down her spine. She wasn't used to hearing someone promise her protection. She wasn't used to anyone caring for her like this. But she also knew that the world Victor had pulled her into was not a safe one. The threats were real, and they were constant. And yet, as she stood there beside him, the weight of the world seemed a little less heavy. For the first time in her life, Marie felt like she wasn't alone. The fear that had once ruled her life, the fear of being invisible and unimportant, was beginning to fade. She wasn't just a maid anymore. She was someone who mattered, someone who had a place in this world. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough to give her the courage to face whatever came next. As the sun dipped below the horizon, Victor turned to her, his expression unreadable. "There's one last thing I need you to understand," he said, his voice low. "Trust is everything in this world. You trust the wrong person, and it can cost you everything." Marie met his gaze, her heart pounding in her chest. "I trust you," she said, the words coming easily, though she hadn't realized just how much they meant until they left her mouth. Victor's eyes softened, just slightly, and for the first time, he smiled. Just a little, but it was enough to make her heart skip a beat. "Good," he said. "That's the first step. And together, we'll make sure you're not just surviving in this world. You'll thrive." The promise in his words made her believe that maybe, just maybe, she could. And for the first time, she truly felt like she was in control of her destiny. Marie had started to feel like she was finally getting used to the new rhythm of her life. The mansion had become more than just a place of work. It was starting to feel like a home. Every morning, she woke up in the small but comfortable room Victor had given her, and as she walked through the halls, she could feel the weight of her past slowly lifting. Victor's words kept echoing in her mind. He had promised to protect her, to make sure no one ever treated her the way they had before. But as the days went by, she began to wonder, was it enough? Could she truly trust him? Could she trust herself in this world that was so different from everything she had known? It wasn't long before she was faced with another test. A new threat had emerged, and it came from a place she least expected. She had been summoned to one of Victor's meetings with his most trusted associates. The room was dimly lit, and the tension was palpable. The men around the table spoke in hushed tones, their voices low and measured, but there was an underlying current of danger that Marie could feel in her bones. Victor stood at the head of the table, his usual calm demeanor never faltering, but his eyes were sharp as he watched every person in the room. "Marie," he said, his gaze meeting hers, "I need you to listen closely." She nodded, suddenly aware that her presence here was no accident. Victor had asked her to sit in on this meeting for a reason. She wasn't just a bystander anymore. She was part of the team. "There's been a problem," Victor continued. "A rival faction has been trying to move in on our territory. They've been making moves behind the scenes, and we need to respond. But there's something more here." Marie leaned forward, her heart racing. She had been trained, but she had never been this close to the action. The weight of the moment settled on her shoulders. This was real. This wasn't just about learning to navigate the power dynamics in the mansion. This was about surviving in Victor's world. "I'm sending you to speak with them," Victor said, his voice steady. "I need you to find out what they know. I need you to be smart. Use your instincts." Marie's breath caught in her throat. He was trusting her with something that she hadn't expected, not this soon. "Victor, you're ready," he interrupted, his gaze unwavering. "You've proven yourself to me." His words held weight. The trust he was placing in her was not something she took lightly. This was her moment to prove that she belonged here, that she wasn't just a maid. She was more than that now. She was part of something bigger. As she left the room and made her way to the location Victor had given her, she couldn't shake the nerves that were building inside her. The world outside was even more dangerous than she had imagined. The streets were darker, the people colder. Every corner held the potential for betrayal. When she finally arrived, the place was quiet, too quiet. The building looked abandoned, but she knew better. It was a trap. She could feel it. But she also knew that running wasn't an option. Not anymore. She had come this far, and she wasn't going to turn back. She stepped inside, her heart pounding in her chest. The smell of old wood and dust filled the air as she moved cautiously through the space. Every step was deliberate, every sound amplified in the silence. It wasn't until she reached the back of the building that she found them. The men from the rival faction, sitting in a circle, their eyes fixed on her as if they had been expecting her all along. One of them stood up, his posture confident, a smirk playing at the corners of his lips. "Victor's maid," he said, his tone mocking. "I didn't expect him to send someone like you." Marie didn't flinch. She had been insulted before, and she wasn't about to let it stop her now. "Victor sent me to speak with you," she said, her voice steady. "I'm here to find out what you're planning." The man's smirk faded, but he didn't respond immediately. Instead, he motioned for her to sit down. "What do you want to know?" he asked, his tone more serious now. Marie sat across from him, her eyes never leaving his. She had to be careful. She couldn't afford to show any weakness. "I want to know what you're after," she said. "And I want to know how far you're willing to go to get it." The room fell silent. The tension between them was thick enough to cut through. For a moment, she thought they might attack, but instead, the man leaned back in his chair and laughed. "You really think you're in control here?" he asked, his voice laced with amusement. "You're just a pawn in Victor's game. He's been playing you from the start." The words stung, but Marie refused to let them show. "I'm no one's pawn," she said, her voice cold. "I'm here because I choose to be." The man studied her for a moment, then shrugged. "We'll see how long that lasts." He motioned to the others, and they all stood, their eyes never leaving her. "I don't have time for this," she said, standing up to leave. "Tell Victor I'll be back." She turned to walk out, but the man's voice stopped her. "You're making a mistake," he said. "Victor can't protect you forever." But Marie didn't respond. She didn't need to. She knew the truth now. She was no longer the helpless maid. She was more than that. And she was ready to fight for her place in this world. As she left the building and made her way back to the mansion, she couldn't help but feel a sense of pride. She had faced the danger head on, and she had come out stronger. She wasn't afraid anymore. She had earned her place beside Victor, and she wasn't going to let anyone take it from her. Marie stood in the grand hallway of the mansion, feeling the weight of the decision she had just made. She had just returned from the confrontation with the rival faction, a meeting that had left her shaken but resolute. The threat had been real, and she had faced it head on, walking out without showing any signs of weakness. Yet, the weight of the words that man had said to her still echoed in her mind. Victor can't protect you forever. It wasn't that she doubted Victor. It was the world he had brought her into, one that was far more dangerous than she had imagined. She was beginning to realize just how much was at stake. As she walked down the hallway, her thoughts were interrupted by the sound of footsteps approaching. She turned to see Victor walking toward her, his expression unreadable. The moment their eyes met, he raised an eyebrow, sensing something was off. "You're back earlier than I expected," he said, his voice calm, but carrying an edge of curiosity. Marie gave him a small smile, though it didn't quite reach her eyes. "I've learned that things don't always go according to plan," she replied. "I came back to report." Victor motioned for her to sit, and as she did, he took a seat across from her. The tension between them was palpable. There was no need for formalities anymore. They both knew what the other was thinking. "Tell me what happened," Victor said. His voice was steady, but Marie could see the flicker of concern in his eyes. She hesitated for a moment, gathering her thoughts. "I went in as planned," she began. "I spoke with them. But there was something off. They were expecting me. It was a trap." Victor's gaze darkened, and for a moment, she thought she saw a flash of anger in his eyes. "A trap?" he asked, his tone sharpening. "Did they make any threats?" Marie shook her head, trying to keep her voice steady. "No. They wanted to see what I knew. They were testing me. And they told me something about you. They said you couldn't protect me forever." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with the weight of their meaning. Victor was silent for a long moment, his face impassive. "They're trying to manipulate you," he said finally, his voice low and cold. "They know I care about you. They're trying to use that against me." Marie's heart clenched at his words, but she didn't allow herself to flinch. "I know, but they were right about one thing. This world is dangerous. I'm not blind to that." Victor leaned forward, his dark eyes locking onto hers with the intensity that sent a shiver down her spine. "Marie, you're not a pawn in this. You're a part of this. No one gets to use you, not even them." His voice was firm, but there was something else there, something she hadn't expected. It was protectiveness, something she had never experienced before. "I don't want you to be afraid," he continued, his tone softening just slightly. "This world is ruthless, yes, but I won't let anything happen to you. I've made sure of that." Marie swallowed, the emotions building inside her. She wanted to believe him, she truly did, but fear had always been a constant companion. "I'm not afraid of the world," she said, her voice steady. "I'm afraid of what happens if I can't keep up. If I fail." Victor studied her for a moment, his expression unreadable. Then, without warning, he stood up and walked over to where she sat. He reached out, his hand resting gently on her shoulder. "You won't fail," he said, his voice firm, the conviction in his words undeniable. "I won't let you, and you're not alone in this." Marie felt a surge of warmth spread through her chest at his words, but it was quickly followed by doubt. She had been alone for so long, had learned to survive on her own. The thought of depending on someone else, of trusting someone fully, felt almost impossible. "I don't know if I can do this," she admitted, her voice trembling just slightly. Victor's eyes softened, and for the first time, she saw a glimpse of something personal in them. "You don't have to do it alone. We'll do this together. You're part of this family now, and no one messes with my family." The strength in his words resonated deeply with Marie. She had never imagined that she would find herself here, in a world of danger and power, but she was beginning to understand that this was where she belonged. This was where she could finally be seen, not just as a maid or an invisible servant, but as someone who mattered. "I'm with you," she said, her voice stronger now. "I'll do whatever it takes." Victor's gaze held hers for a long moment, and then, as if satisfied with her answer, he nodded. "Good," he said, "because this is just the beginning." The words sent a ripple of uncertainty through her, but she didn't back down. Whatever this world was, she was ready for it. She wasn't just surviving anymore. She was living, and for the first time, she felt like she had a future. Together, she and Victor would face whatever came next, and she would no longer be the invisible maid. She would be Marie, a force to be reckoned with in her own right. Marie had been thrust deeper into Victor's world, a world that was becoming both familiar and overwhelming at the same time. After the tense confrontation with the rival faction, she had been on edge, her every move now under the scrutinizing gaze of those who wanted to use her as a pawn. But it was Victor's words that kept her grounded. "You're not a pawn. You're part of this family now." Still, doubts lingered in the back of her mind. The world she had entered was dangerous, and though Victor had promised her protection, she couldn't help but wonder how long it would last. It had been a few days since the meeting with the rival faction, and Marie had been trying to focus on the lessons Victor had been teaching her. Each day, he had shown her a new side of his world, from the intricacies of managing his empire to the brutal realities of the streets he controlled. She had learned quickly, absorbing everything he taught her, but the weight of it all was starting to sink in. The mansion that had once seemed so grand now felt like a gilded cage, and the more she learned, the more she realized just how much danger they were all in. One evening, as Marie sat in the study, reviewing some of the documents Victor had given her, she was interrupted by the sound of footsteps. She looked up to see Victor standing in the doorway, his expression as serious as ever. "We need to talk," he said, his voice low and tense. Marie stood up, her heart racing. She had learned by now that when Victor said they needed to talk, it was never good news. "What's going on?" she asked, trying to keep her voice steady. Victor stepped into the room, closing the door behind him. "There's been a development," he said, his gaze never leaving her face. "The rival faction we dealt with earlier, there's something more going on than we initially thought." Marie's stomach dropped. "What do you mean?" "They've been making moves behind the scenes. We've been getting reports of strange activity, and I'm afraid they're preparing to strike." Victor's words were like a punch to the gut. She had known the rivalry wasn't over, but hearing it confirmed made it all the more real. "What do we do?" Marie asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "We prepare," Victor said firmly. "I'm not going to let them take us by surprise. I'm going to need your help." Marie's heart skipped a beat. She had been waiting for this moment, the moment when Victor would finally treat her as more than just a bystander in his world. "What do you need me to do?" she asked, her voice steady now. Victor looked at her for a long moment, as if assessing whether she was truly ready for what he was about to ask. "I need you to get close to them," he said finally. "I need you to find out what they're planning." Marie's breath caught in her throat. "You want me to go back to them?" she asked, her voice filled with disbelief. "Yes," Victor said, his expression unwavering. "I know it's dangerous, but you're the only one who can do this. You've already proven you can handle yourself. I trust you." The weight of his words hit her hard. She had never been trusted like this before. She had spent her entire life being invisible, dismissed, never given a chance to prove herself. And now, here she was, being asked to step into the lion's den. She didn't know if she was ready for it, but she also knew that there was no turning back now. "I'll do it," she said, her voice firm. Victor gave her a small nod, his eyes showing a rare flicker of approval. "Good," he said. "We'll need to move quickly. I'll make the arrangements, but you need to stay sharp. We don't know who we can trust." As he turned to leave, Victor paused at the door. "Be careful," he said, his voice softer than before. "I'm not losing you." The words felt like a promise, one that resonated deep inside her. For the first time since she had stepped into Victor's world, Marie felt like she truly belonged. She wasn't just a pawn, and she wasn't just someone to be protected. She was a player in this dangerous game, and she had a role to play. The next few days were a blur of preparation. Marie spent hours studying everything she could about the rival faction, learning their structure, their key players, and any weaknesses she could exploit. She knew it wasn't going to be easy. She was walking into enemy territory, and there was no guarantee she would make it out unscathed. But she couldn't back down now. She had come too far, and Victor had placed his trust in her. She wouldn't fail him. As the day of the meeting with the rival faction approached, Marie found herself standing in front of a mirror, adjusting her outfit. She wasn't wearing anything too extravagant, just a simple black dress and a jacket, but she knew the impression she made would matter. She wasn't just going in as a maid this time. She was going in as someone who had the power to change the course of the game. Her reflection stared back at her, and for the first time, she didn't see the scared, invisible girl who had walked into this world months ago. She saw someone strong, someone capable, someone who had earned her place here. As she stepped out of the room, ready to face whatever came next, she felt the weight of her decision settle on her shoulders. There was no turning back. The world was watching, and she was ready to play her part. Marie's heart raced as she walked toward the meeting place. the weight of her decision pressing heavily on her chest. Every step seemed to echo in the cold, empty hallways of the mansion, the walls now seeming to close in around her. This wasn't just another day of learning or observing from the sidelines. This was the moment where she would prove herself, not just to Victor, but to herself. She had trained, prepared, and now it was time to walk into enemy territory, not as a maid, but as someone who could change the tide of the game. The plan was simple, at least in theory. She was to meet with the rival faction's leaders and extract information, learn their intentions, and hopefully find a weakness she could exploit. But nothing in Victor's world was ever truly simple. Every move she made had to be calculated. Every word, every gesture, every glance had to serve a purpose. She knew the risks, and yet, she couldn't help but feel a strange sense of excitement. For the first time, she wasn't running away from the danger. She was running toward it. The meeting was set at a neutral location, a small restaurant tucked away in a quiet part of the city. The place was modest, unassuming even, but Marie knew better than to let her guard down. The quiet exterior could easily hide dangerous people, just as Victor's own world had shown her. As she entered, her eyes quickly scanned the room. There were only a few patrons scattered about, but Marie could feel the eyes of the men in the back corner of the restaurant watching her every move. She didn't let the weight of their gaze affect her. She walked up to the table, keeping her posture confident, but not too forward. The man at the center of the table stood to greet her. His eyes were cold, calculating, but there was a hint of amusement there too, as if he knew something she didn't. "Marie," he said, his voice smooth, with a touch of mockery. "Victor's maid. I must say, I wasn't expecting you." Marie kept her expression neutral, forcing herself to remain calm. She had learned quickly from Victor that showing emotion could be a weakness, especially in situations like this. "I'm here on Victor's behalf," she replied, her voice steady. "I trust we can get down to business." The man chuckled, a dark sound that sent a chill through her. "Business, yes. But I must admit, I'm curious. You're his maid, and yet here you are, in a seat at the table with us. You've got a long way to go before you truly understand this world." Marie took a seat across from him, her eyes never leaving his. "I'm not here to understand it. I'm here to make sure Victor doesn't lose what he's worked for." The man's smirk faltered for a moment, but he recovered quickly. "Is that so?" he said, leaning forward. "And what makes you think you're in a position to do that?" Marie's gaze hardened. "I'm not just a maid," she said, the words tasting foreign on her tongue, but feeling right. "I'm someone who's been given a chance to prove my worth. And I'm not about to let anyone take that away." There was a brief silence, as if the man was weighing her words, trying to gauge whether she was bluffing or telling the truth. He seemed to find something in her that amused him, and his lips curled into a smile. "You've got fire," he said, his tone almost approving. "I'll give you that. But fire can be dangerous, Marie. You might think you're playing this game, but it's much bigger than you realize." "Then I guess I'll find out," she replied, her voice calm. The man studied her for a moment longer before gesturing to the others at the table. "You've got guts. I'll give you that much. But don't think you're in control here. We've been planning this for months. Victor's empire is weak, and it won't take much for us to take over." Marie's stomach tightened. She had expected some level of hostility, but hearing it so openly was a different matter. Still, she didn't let it show. "That's where you're wrong," she said, leaning forward slightly. "Victor may not be as strong as you think, but he's not weak. And as for you, I'm not afraid of your threats." The man's smirk disappeared, replaced by a look of genuine interest. "You really think you can stop us?" he asked. "We have the power, the resources. What makes you think you have a chance?" Marie met his gaze without flinching. "I don't need power or resources," she said, her voice steady. "I have something you don't, loyalty. And that's stronger than anything you can buy." The man paused, clearly surprised by her response. For a moment, it seemed like he didn't know how to react. Then, he chuckled darkly. "Loyalty? In this world?" he asked, his voice dripping with disbelief. "That's a weakness, not a strength." "Maybe," Marie said, her eyes never leaving his. "But it's the only thing that matters to me." The man leaned back in his chair, his fingers tapping the table as he regarded her. "You're bold, I'll give you that. But I don't think you understand what you're really up against. This game isn't about loyalty or strength. It's about survival. And in the end, only the strongest survive." Marie took a deep breath, her heart pounding, but her resolve firm. Then I guess I'll have to survive. The man's expression darkened, and he stood, signaling the end of the meeting. We'll see about that, he said, his voice cold. Victor won't be able to protect you forever. Marie stood as well, her mind racing. She knew this was only the beginning. But one thing was clear, she was no longer just a maid. She was someone to be reckoned with, and she wasn't going to back down. As she walked out of the restaurant, her heart raced with anticipation. This was her world now, and she was ready to fight for her place in it. Marie walked away from the restaurant with a sense of resolve settling in her chest. The meeting had not gone as she had expected, but it had confirmed something important. Victor's enemies were not just playing a game. They were in this to win. The words they had said, the threats, they were real. But so was her commitment. She was no longer just the maid who could be dismissed at a moment's notice. She was part of something bigger now, and she couldn't afford to back down. She had made her choice, and there was no turning back. Her mind raced with the details of the meeting. They had tried to provoke her, to get under her skin, but she had held her ground. She had done what Victor had asked, gathered information, shown that she was not someone to be underestimated. But now, she was left with the knowledge that the battle had only just begun. The rival faction would continue to push, and there was no way to predict how far they would go to get what they wanted. As Marie approached the mansion, the weight of the world seemed to press down on her shoulders. She had survived her first real test, but she knew that the hardest part was still ahead. She had earned Victor's trust, but that trust came with expectations. Expectations that she had to live up to, no matter what. When she entered the mansion, she found Victor waiting for her in his study. The moment she stepped inside, he looked up from the documents in front of him, his eyes sharp and focused. How did it go? He asked, his voice low, but there was a trace of concern in it. Marie took a deep breath and straightened her shoulders. She wasn't about to show any weakness. They know we're watching, she said, her voice steady. They're planning something bigger. They think they can take you down, and they're going to keep pushing. Victor's eyes narrowed. I figured as much. They won't stop until they get what they want. Marie hesitated for a moment before speaking again. They tried to manipulate me. They said you couldn't protect me forever. Victor's expression darkened, but his voice remained calm. They'll say anything to get into your head. Don't listen to them. Marie met his gaze, her mind working through everything she had learned. She had seen a glimpse of their strategy. They were trying to divide and conquer, and they were using her to do it. But she wasn't going to be a pawn in their game. What's the next move? She asked, her voice filled with determination. Victor stood up and walked toward her, his presence commanding. Yet there was something softer in his eyes as he spoke. We prepare. We wait for them to make the next move. But I won't sit idly by. I'll make sure they understand that they're not dealing with someone they can push around. He paused, then added, and Marie, you need to understand something. What we're doing, what I'm doing, isn't just about protecting my empire. It's about protecting the people I care about. That includes you. The words hung in the air between them, and Marie felt something stir inside her, something she hadn't allowed herself to feel before. A sense of belonging, of being more than just an outsider in this world. She had earned his trust, and now, she was part of the family. I'm ready, she said, her voice firm. Victor gave her a nod of approval. Good. Then let's get to work. The next few days were filled with planning and strategy. Marie was more involved than ever before, helping Victor navigate the complexities of the situation. They used every resource at their disposal, informants, allies, and the vast network Victor had built over the years. But no matter how many steps ahead they seemed to be, the rival faction was always lurking in the shadows, waiting for the right moment to strike. Marie spent hours studying their movements, looking for any signs of weakness. It was exhausting, but it was also empowering. She was no longer just watching from the sidelines. She was in the middle of it, making decisions, offering insights. And with every passing day, she felt herself growing stronger, more capable. One evening, as they reviewed the latest intel in Victor's study, he paused and looked at her. You've done well, he said, his voice sincere. I knew I was right to trust you. Marie felt a surge of pride at his words. She had earned her place here, and she wasn't about to let anyone take it away from her. Thank you, she said, her voice steady. But we're not done yet. Victor's lips curved into a small, approving smile. No, we're just getting started. The days blurred together as they prepared for the inevitable confrontation. Every move they made, every decision, could change the outcome of the war that was brewing between them and the rival faction. There were moments when Marie questioned whether she was truly ready for what was to come. But then she thought of the promise she had made to herself. She wasn't going to let Victor or anyone else down. She had a role to play, and she was going to play it to the best of her ability. As the final pieces of the puzzle began to fall into place, Victor gave her a final piece of advice. This isn't just about power, Marie. It's about control. Control over your destiny, control over the people you care about, and control over your own fate. Marie nodded, her resolve hardening. She had come too far to back out now. This was her fight too, and she wasn't going to lose. The days that followed were tense, the kind of days that seemed to stretch on forever yet pass in the blink of an eye. Marie could feel the weight of every decision pressing down on her, the knowledge that one wrong move could tip the scales in favor of the rival faction. It was a feeling that had become all too familiar in Victor's world, but for her, it was new. Every day, she spent hours poring over documents, learning more about the people Victor was up against, figuring out their weaknesses and their strategies. Her mind was constantly working, constantly analyzing, looking for anything that could give them an advantage. She could feel herself growing stronger with each passing day, more confident, more capable. But it wasn't just about knowledge. It was about presence. Every time she walked into a room, she held her head higher. She had become more than just a shadow in Victor's world. She had become a player. A week after her meeting with the rival faction, the first move came. It was subtle, a few men showing up in one of Victor's territories, but it was enough. It was a message, a challenge. Victor didn't hesitate. He called Marie into his office, his expression calm, but his eyes alert. "They've made their move," he said, his voice steady. "It's time to show them that we're not afraid to fight back." Marie nodded, understanding the gravity of the situation. She wasn't just here to observe anymore. She was part of this world, and it was her job to help navigate it, to help protect what they had. "What do we need to do?" she asked, her voice firm. "We need to send a message," Victor replied, his eyes narrowing. "They think they can intimidate us, but we're going to show them that we're stronger than they think. I need you to go to the meeting. Get close, find out what they're planning, and be prepared to act." Marie felt a surge of adrenaline. This was it, the moment she had been preparing for. She had been tested before, but now she was stepping into a more dangerous role, one that could change everything. "I'm ready," she said. Victor nodded, his gaze never leaving hers. "I know you are. But remember, this is more than just a negotiation. This is about survival." With that, he stood, walking toward her. "Let's show them what we're made of." The meeting was set at a secluded location on the outskirts of the city, a place known for its quiet, unassuming nature. It was the perfect place for a clandestine conversation, but Marie knew better than to let her guard down. She arrived early, her mind focused and sharp, as she observed the area, mentally preparing for the confrontation ahead. She wasn't sure who she would be facing, but she knew one thing for certain. She had to be ready for anything. As the meeting time drew closer, Marie made her way into the dimly lit building. She was greeted by a few of the faction's men, their faces unreadable, their eyes filled with the same coldness she had seen in Victor's rivals. She offered them a polite nod, but said nothing, keeping her emotions tightly in check. They led her into a back room where the leaders of the rival faction were waiting. The moment she walked in, their eyes were immediately on her, their attention sharp, assessing. The man in charge, the one who had mocked her in their first meeting, stood and walked toward her, a smirk playing on his lips. "Marie, I wasn't expecting you," he said, his voice dripping with disdain. But this time, Marie didn't flinch. She stood her ground, meeting his gaze with the same calm confidence that had become second nature to her. "I'm here to discuss your next move," she said, her voice steady. The man raised an eyebrow. "Is that so?" he said, stepping closer. "You're quite bold for someone who's just a maid." Marie's pulse quickened, but she kept her composure. "I'm here as a representative of Victor," she replied, her tone sharp. "And I'm here to find out what you want." The man's smirk faded, replaced by a calculating look. "What we want," he began, "is simple. We want control, and we're willing to do whatever it takes to get it." Marie studied him carefully. She could feel the tension in the room, the unspoken threats hanging in the air. But she knew that this wasn't the time to show fear. She had to stay in control. Victor won't back down, she said, her voice cold. And neither will I. The man laughed, but there was no humor in it. Victor thinks he's invincible, he said, shaking his head. But everyone has their breaking point. And so do you, Marie. The words stung, but Marie didn't let them affect her. We'll see about that, she said, her voice firm. The conversation continued for what felt like hours, each exchange more intense than the last. Marie did everything she could to stay one step ahead, asking questions, probing for weaknesses. She knew that this was her chance to gather the information they needed. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, the meeting came to an end. The man smiled at her, but there was no warmth in it. This isn't over, he said, his voice dripping with malice. We'll be seeing you soon. Marie stood and walked out of the room, her mind racing. She had gathered the information they needed, but she also knew that the storm was far from over. As she made her way back to the mansion, her mind was focused on one thing. They were just getting started, and she would be ready. The days that followed were filled with a tension Marie could almost touch. She had returned from the meeting with the rival faction with new information, but it didn't bring relief. Only a sense of impending danger. The power struggle was intensifying, and with each passing moment, the stakes grew higher. She was no longer just playing a small part in Victor's world. She was an active player in a game she had no choice but to master. The rival faction's plans were clearer now, but they were still hiding something. Their moves were calculated, their silence louder than any threat. The fact that they hadn't attacked yet only meant they were waiting for the perfect moment to strike. Marie knew that time was running out, and that she would have to make a move soon. Victor had not let up on his demands for her involvement, pushing her deeper into his world. But despite everything, she had never felt more alive. The feeling of being part of something bigger, something important, had grown on her. She was no longer just the maid or the outsider. She was Marie, a force to be reckoned with in her own right. One evening, as the moonlight filtered through the grand windows of the mansion, she sat across from Victor in his study, watching as he meticulously reviewed the latest information. He had been quiet lately, his usual confidence replaced with a rare sense of unease. Marie had noticed the change in him, though he had never mentioned it. Tonight, however, it was different. He didn't look up from his work as she entered, but there was a shift in the air. She stood in front of his desk, the weight of her next words pressing down on her chest. Victor, she said, her voice steady. We need to make a move. We can't keep waiting for them to strike. Victor slowly looked up at her, his dark eyes meeting hers. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The room seemed to hum with the tension that had built between them, a tension neither of them could ignore anymore. You're right, he said finally, his voice low but firm. We've been playing it too safe. It's time to take control. The words hit her like a wave of cold air. She had known this moment was coming, but now that it was here, she couldn't help but feel the weight of what it meant. This wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about victory. It was about finally taking a stand. What do we do? She asked, her voice barely a whisper. We strike first, he said, standing up and walking toward the window, his gaze far away. But we do it strategically. I need you to go back to them. Pretend like you're still one of their own. Get closer, learn everything you can. Then, we'll move in and take them down. Marie's heart pounded in her chest. She had been expecting this, but the idea of going back to the enemy's den, pretending to be one of them, was terrifying. I'm ready, she said, her voice strong despite the fear that gripped her. Victor turned to her, his eyes softer now, but there was still that undeniable power behind them. I know you are, and I trust you. But remember, we can't make mistakes now. This is everything. He stepped closer to her, his gaze unwavering. We do this right, and we win. But we have to be smart. One wrong move, and we lose everything. She nodded, feeling the weight of his words settle on her shoulders. This wasn't just about her anymore. This was about the future. I won't fail you, she said, the words coming naturally now. Victor's lips curved into a small smile, his approval unmistakable. I know you won't. We've come too far for that. The next day, Marie set out for the meeting, her mind focused, her every step calculated. She had come to learn how to play this game, and now, she was going to show just how far she had come. The rival faction had underestimated her once, and that mistake would cost them. She wasn't just a pawn in this game anymore. She was a player, and she was going to take control of her destiny. As she walked into the building, the same cold feeling washed over her. The men at the table looked up. As she entered, their eyes calculating. But this time, Marie didn't flinch. She stood tall, her gaze steady. The man who had mocked her before raised an eyebrow, his smirk still in place. "Back so soon?" he asked, his tone dripping with disbelief. Marie didn't respond with words. Instead, she walked confidently toward the table and took a seat, her eyes never leaving his. "I'm here for business," she said, her voice calm but firm. "And I think it's time we talk seriously." The atmosphere in the room shifted. The men exchanged glances, clearly thrown off by her sudden confidence. "What's changed?" the man asked, his tone now wary. Marie leaned forward, her hands resting on the table. "What's changed," she said slowly, "is that I'm not afraid of you anymore. And I'm here to make sure this ends." The room fell silent, the tension thick enough to cut through. Marie could see the fear flicker in their eyes as they realized they had underestimated her. She was no longer just Victor's maid. She was Marie, and she had a future of her own. This world was hers to claim, and no one was going to take it from her. The game had changed, and for the first time, she was in control. In this gripping tale of power, loyalty, and survival, Marie navigates a dangerous world filled with intrigue and betrayal. As she becomes more deeply involved in Victor's empire, she realizes that her role is not just that of a maid, but someone capable of shaping her destiny. As their relationship evolves, Marie learns the harsh realities of the world Victor controls, and the stakes become higher with each move they make. In the midst of threats and rival factions, Marie's strength and determination shine through, pushing her to rise above the position she once had. Romance stories are not always about love at first sight or perfect endings. Sometimes, they are about finding trust and strength in the most unexpected places. As Marie faces the challenges ahead, she must prove to herself and to Victor that she is more than just a pawn in a game of power. These romance stories delve deep into the complexities of character, testing what it means to fight for your place and for the people you care about. Will Marie continue to rise in this dangerous world, or will the pressures of loyalty and power break her? Find out in this gripping narrative of survival and self-discovery. In romance stories like this, it's not just about love. It's about forging a path in a world full of enemies and allies alike.